to this computer. Yeah, so I want to do this last little chunk on probably the last kind of big conceptual thing of the semester. Yeah, and I hope you'll be a little patient with me through it. I know that this sort of like more wonky coding stuff can be a little disorienting. But this is to say the least. But this is a really, really, really useful and kind of like foundational concept that I'm gonna explore. And I do think that all of you will be able to make some sort of use of this pattern in all of your digital projects. So with that being said, I'm gonna create a new project in the folder, in the sessions folder. And I'm going to call this um, classes and resources. And I'll just create a new project. Um, so a lot of you are trying to make things in your game that are somewhat repeated, right? Like, I know that there are like, you guys, dental clinic, you have like teeth that need cleaning and um, for like for the bar mystery, there's like clues that you need to like find and that might, maybe objects have like words associated with them. Like if you click on a key, it'll say like this is a key and the bartender had it last week or whatever, right? Can anybody think of any other objects that they need that in their games that have like sort of information attached to them or like that you kind of feel like need a little bit more structure than you've been able to create so far?
You want to pick up the item
Be able to pick up the item.
the something repeated or with the bottle. We want to make that.
Oh, you want to make the bottle actually like pour out stuff? That's cool. Um,
Like inventory systems.
yeah, some sort of inventory system where you have like items and things that you're like picking up and putting down, right? Um, oh man, well you said the bottle thing, and I want to show you how to do that too. That's a slightly different topic. But I'll get back to like liquids and bottles and stuff, right? But there are lots of things like inventories or clues or kind of like repeated objects that want to have like a little bit more structure to them, right? Um, and we can start to explore those patterns. We can create those patterns. We could just, oftentimes we create scenes in Godot. We create and instantiate scenes with other nodes and stuff. But there's also like another way to kind of like create some of these more complicated data structures. And if we look at the kind of, we go back to like where we were in the beginning of the semester, where we were first talking about this program, right? We have these different nodes, right? We have a sprite 2D node and a node 2D. And if you go and just add a new node, you see that there's this big old tree of nodes, right? And we know that there's some sort of relationship between the nodes, right? We know that there's like the node itself is like the great grandparent, and then we have canvas item and the node. And then as a child of node, we have a sprite, right? But like, what is this relationship? Like, how is it that these things are all connected, right? How does like a what's how is like a node related to a how is a node 2D related to a node? And how is like a sprite way down here related to a node 2D? Does that question make sense? How are these things like connected to each other?
They're both 2D now.
They're both 2D nodes, yeah, and they both kind of have stuff in common, right? Like what are like, we see that like this node has all of these properties over here, right? And this node has all of these properties over here. And some of these are the same, right? Like the node, the sprite, or I guess a node 2D has these properties from node, right? Properties and methods associated with the node part of it. but then it also has this like canvas item stuff that's associated with canvas item, and it has this transformation stuff, right? And then a sprite has all of that stuff. It has the transformation and the canvas item and the node stuff, but then it also has extra stuff for the texture, right? So like what's like the relationship between these things? Why does this one have all of the stuff that the node has, but then some extra stuff? Does that make any sense? Like what why does it have how come it has some of the things that node has, but then has extra stuff on top? Right? Like this node 2D, this basic node has these properties and these properties and these properties. And this sprite has all of those same properties and then also some new stuff, right? Yeah, it is a child, and it's specifically like a child in this sort of big tree of relationships, right? This node is the base, and then its parent or its child is node 2D, and then sprite is a child of that. And the thing that it is a child of is it's a child of the class, right? So there's this new word that I'm introducing today called class. And a class is kind of like is this sort of this building block that things inherit stuff from. So node is this basic class, and a class is really just it's like a container. It's like a little box, and like when something is in a class, it has certain properties, like certain pieces of information that you can store with it, and certain methods, like things that it can do, right? Almost like a Pokemon card, right? It has like stats and a name and a picture and a move that it can do. Um, and when nodes inherit from each other, they like take all of their ancestors' class information and they also add on to it. So for instance, Node has some of these basic properties. It has like these, it has these process properties. Node 2D has these properties, but it also has the canvas item properties and the transformation properties. And then Sprite, and you can see that it inherits, this is the inheritance path, right? The Node 2D inherits from canvas item, which inherits from Node, right? And Sprite 2D, you can see that it inherits from Node 2D and inherits from canvas item and inherits from Node, right? So it like that's kind of how these nodes work is they inherit their traits from their parents and then they add some. Does that kind of make a little bit of sense? Yeah. The reason why I'm explaining all of this is because you can, as a creator, you can also always create your own classes. And your own classes can be used to extend existing classes. So what do I mean by that? I mean, like if I'm here, right, maybe I want to make an item that I want to pick up, right? I might call this item, okay? Then I'll attach a script to it. Um, it'll inherit, this is what it inherits, right? It inherits this base class, the sprite class. Exactly. And it is extending this class, right? And this specific code, all of our code has been extending these classes already, right? We've just been like sort of creating extra functionality on top of it. But what we can always do is we could say we can create a new class that we can then reuse later. So what you can do is you can say class name, and then you can name your class whatever you want, right? So I'll call it item. And maybe my item is going to have a couple of properties, right? Maybe it'll have like a picture. So I'll export a variable called like picture. And that's going to be of type texture, right? Then I will also export a variable called its title. That'll be a string, right? Maybe this is like a game that is, it's like a shop management game or whatever. So maybe I'll also export a variable called price. and that'll be a integer, right? So we see we have these three properties, right? You can also create a function, right? Maybe I'll make a function called use where we can use our item, right? Um, and I'll say this will just be very simple. It'll just print out you used, and then it'll also just print out the title, right? So it'll print out whatever we write here. So I'll save this as item. And because we have, you could just instantiate it a bunch of times as a separate scene or whatever, but because we created it as a class, now we have this ability to go and add it to the tree, and we can just search for item. And here we have an item, right? We created a whole new node called item that is inheriting from Sprite. And when we just create an item, now we can hit create. And maybe I'll say that like this is going to be, like we'll make this, I don't know, we'll call this, let me just go get whatever. I'm going to go to the noun project and just get a couple of icons real quick. Not noun, just the word noun project. I don't want billing, but I want maybe like a sword. That's fine. So I'll download this sword. I don't want to sign in. Okay, then I'm just going to Google sword PNG. Sure. Yeah, why not? I'm just going to paste it. I'm just going to paste it. No. Okay. I'll also get a book. Right, so I have some pictures, and I can just create these new items, right? So I can just create this, I have this item node, which I'll call book, and I have this item node, which I'll call sword. And actually what I'll do is I'll call this one book. I'll call this one sword for reasons that we'll get to. Okay, great. And I will, I will take the texture for the book, right? And I will load it in. So we'll use the book texture. We'll say it's a book. We'll say it costs $20 or whatever, right? And then maybe our sword is going to be a sword. That costs $10 or something, right? And then maybe we have like a player who's trying to use these items, right? Right? Maybe we want to have our player themselves be able to like pick up items, right? So what you could do is you can have a script and maybe you have a variable, an exported variable. That's your held item. And this trick that I've been doing, right, where we do this colon and then we say the anybody understand why we sometimes do this colon thing? Like, what are we doing here when we say colon and then we say either like,
Explicit typing,
yeah, well, what does that mean?
giving specific type of variable instead of letting
The computer just
put a-
figure it out. Right. Like when we put a colon, we say, hey, this held item variable doesn't want to be anything, it wants to be a string, right? It wants to be letters, right? And if we do that, right, we can type in letters in here, right? Or if we say it wants to be an integer, we can say it's an int, right? And then, right, you see the editor switches, right? And it picks the integers instead of the things, right? And these data types, these are also just classes, right? So what that means is that any class you create can also be a variable type that you export, right? So I could say my held item needs to be an item. And we'll see it appears here. And then when we click this assign button, you'll see that we can only pick from our items, right? Let me give one other, maybe we also have like a button or something. Right? If I try and assign stuff, you'll see we only have our available items to pick from. So that's one really nice way to kind of like start sorting things, right? And we can say like book, right? And then what we could maybe even do is we can say in our, our process function, or yeah, process, why not? We'll say if input dot is action just pressed UI accept. If we press the space bar, why don't we held item dot use, right? And we can use, right, these, because we have typed it up here, we get that nice little auto completion where it knows exactly the properties and methods that we have access to. So it'll say, oh yeah, you want to use probably one of your special little things that you said. And yeah, we can just say we want to use. And so now if I run this, right, currently my held item is the book. So if I run this scene and press spacebar, you used book, right? But if I switch it to the sword and use the item, uh, we can now say use sword, right? Um, you can also always extend your right classes. Our base class is just extending the sprite class, but you can always extend your own classes even further. So for instance, maybe this sword, we want to have even more specific stuff that the sword can do that other regular items can't, right? So in this case, I'm going to right click on the sword and extend this script, and it's going to inherit from item. And I'll call this the sword script, sure. And then here I might say, I'm going to give this a new class called weapon. And actually, maybe this script should be called weapon instead of sword, whatever. Rename it weapon, right? And maybe weapons specifically have like an amount of damage they can do, right? So we could say export var damage. Um, and that's going to be by default, maybe we'll make it equal to 5, but you can always change it. And maybe they have a special function called attack, right? Attack, right? And this attack function is going to say, it'll print you did damage. Damage, right? Um, And also, right, this weapon, because it inherits the base class of item, right, we still have all the basic stuff, right? So if we go to the weapon, we can see we have damage, but we also still have sword. We still have the title, we have the price, we have the picture, and we still have this base function. Um, so if we still ran our project, we can press space to use our sword. Um, but also, what you can do is if you extend a function, or if you extend a class, you can always overwrite the function. Um, so for instance, maybe when we use our sword, instead of just using the regular function, we actually want to we can call the attack function instead. So now instead of printing out this basic, you used the thing, we're going to use this function instead. So it's almost like it takes precedent, right? So now if we use our project and we hit space, right, we can see we're doing our damage stuff instead of like our usage stuff. Does that make a little bit of sense? Tiny bit? Does it seem useful, or is it still kind of arbitrary at this point? Bit of both, right? Um, What I will say is that it is incredibly useful to abstract things. So like if you have like things you're trying to pick up, I really recommend making an item class and then picking up things in those items, right? I guess like it's hard to sort of it's hard to really get to know how useful this can be without getting into the specifics of your projects. So perhaps it's best to start trying to just apply this pattern directly. But in a broad sense of things, classes are kind of they're a really very useful pattern for doing all sorts of things like picking up stuff. You kind of want to have all of your objects in your game be classes, and that'll just sort of make your lives a little bit easier. Are there any questions about classes or how that works or why it might be useful? No. Any other questions about how to create some of these things that you want to try and create? Things like picking up stuff or items or these repeatable things, these systems that you sort of have to start building out? Um, Let me think. Does anybody have like a lot of dialogue in their game? I guess no, maybe so. What I will say is that another way that you can use classes to your advantage is by creating customized resources. So this might get a little wonky, but this is very good if you're trying to create dialogue or inventories or anything, right? Um, so show this dialogue demo, I think, is a nice way to demo it. So if we go back to the modules 2D. Where is it? Where is it? Hold, please. Yeah, I'll take this one. Oh, and I probably go well. So, right. Here we have a very basic scene. We just have one scene for like a dialogue box. And you can see that in this example, I use classes in a specific way to help me create more structured experiences, right? So like for instance, I have this script called called uh called line. The script is called line, and you'll see that it extends a specific class up here called resource. Does anybody remember what a resource is in Godot? Did we explain what resources were? Resources are any of the things over here. So, like any files you use, like a picture is a resource, or an MP3 file is a resource. A 3D model is a type of a resource. You can think about nodes as like these little, these little things that do stuff, and they do stuff to things. And the things that they do stuff to are typically like resources, right? So, like pictures, they move pictures around, they play sound effects, they load in 3D models, all that stuff, right? And a resource is just a type of class, and so you can always create your own custom resources, right? So in this example, I have this class that is extending a resource, and this is called a line of dialogue. And here I just have three variables, right? I have like the text itself, I have the name of the character who's speaking it, and then I have a little portrait, right? That make a little sense, right? So this is this first object, and you can always create new resources, right? So you can always just right click and make a new resource. And you'll see here are all of the different types of resources we have access to, whatever. But I can just type in line. I think I can. Oh, line of dialogue, right? I'll call it like first line, right? So you can like make these little resources and then you can go over here and you can set them in the editor, right? So you have this little like sort of template, right? So you can say like hello, and that's said by Bob or whatever, right? So this is the first building block is you create something like a line of dialogue resource. Then I have a second class, which is really simple. This is also just extending a resource. This is called dialogue now. And this is just an array of lines of dialogues. Did we explain what arrays are? Did I skip that? I think I did. Anybody know what an array is? So like a collection, it's just like a list. Like an array is just a list of objects. So you can have the numbers like 1, 2, 4, 8. Those could all just be a list in an array, right? You can have an array of letters. You can have an array of any type of data. So in this example, we're just creating a variable that is an array, and it's going to be an array of these resources that we just did, right? So then finally, all we have to do here is now we have this dialog box that exports a lines of dialogue, right? We have this variable called lines, and it's of type dialogue, right? And if we look at the dialogue resource, we can click it open here, and we see here's our array, right? It's our array of dialogue. We can open that up, and we see that each of these has a little like drop down where we can just kind of create our dialogue, right? So we can create our first line of dialogue. We can say what you want. You can create your character name. You can give it a portrait, right? We can have our second line here. Then we can make a new line, right? We can say like, um, you're not very nice. And this can be said by the regular robot, right? And we can drop in our regular old portrait. And what we're doing here is we just have created a little function where we press spacebar and we go through the array and we just say, we pass in a line of dialogue and then we say we want our portrait to be equal to this texture and the name to be equal to the character name and the line equal to the character line, right? So then you can just do stuff where you just kind of have these little like dialogue sequences. And it's very easy to kind of create this sort of structured interaction because you're using these classes. Are there any questions on that? All right, we'll stop the video there. But this is, again, I hope it can maybe just sit in the back of your brains as something that might be useful eventually. So I'll stop recording.